Have you ever noticed how quickly people assume a woman without a man must be waiting for one? As if singleness were a temporary layover, an unfortunate pause in a story that's supposed to climax with romance. Society still clings to this silent rule that a woman's life is incomplete unless she's chosen, partnered, secured. From fairy tales to family dinners, the message is repeated so often it starts to echo inside her, even when she's not listening. But what happens when that woman, consciously, confidently, chooses not to follow that script? She doesn't stay single because she's broken, bitter, or invisible. She stays single because she's aware, because she's watched what love without depth does to people, because she's been enough things to enough people to finally realize she was never asked to be enough for herself. Her choice isn't a result of rejection. It's a rebellion against settling. It's not a lack. It's a presence that no longer craves completion from the outside. And yet people ask, "But don't you want someone?" As if wanting someone must mean needing them. As if happiness only counts when it's shared with someone who validates it. But here's the truth they rarely admit. There are women who prefer the fullness of solitude over the fragments of connection. Not because they gave up on love, but because they stopped giving in to the version of it that asks them to shrink. So here's the question no one dares to ask out loud. What kind of woman chooses solitude when the world begs her not to? The kind who's tired of waiting to be seen, the kind who's done compromising her peace for companionship, the kind who has learned that true love doesn't always wear a ring, it sometimes wears silence. And in that silence, something awakens, not loneliness, but power. And that's where her story truly begins. Lonely is a hunger, alone is a choice. And that distinction, it changes everything. Loneliness aches. It's the echo of unreturned calls, empty chairs, and a silence that stings. But solitude, the kind chosen with intention, isn't an absence. It's a presence that expands. It's the quiet where clarity lives. It's not something to run from, it's something to return to. We confuse the two because we've been conditioned to believe that our value comes from being wanted, seen, needed, that the noise of another person is the only thing that validates our existence. But what if the silence wasn't a punishment, but a sanctuary? What if alone is where the real work begins? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that becoming doesn't happen in crowds. It happens in stillness. It happens in the pause between relationships, in the nights when she learns to hold herself without apology, in the mornings when she wakes up not to anyone's approval, but to her own. The woman who chooses solitude isn't avoiding intimacy. She's redefining it. Her connection is inward first, anchored in self-trust, not desperation. She's not building walls. She's building alignment. She knows that being alone with herself doesn't mean she's missing out. It means she's listening to the parts of her that were silenced in noise, overlooked in relationships, drowned out by the need to please. And here's what's most misunderstood. Her solitude is not her weakness. It's her initiation into depth, into discernment, into the kind of presence that makes others nervous because they can't figure out how she's full without anyone filling her. That's the power of chosen solitude. It's not about isolation. It's about integration. It's the beginning of individuation, the moment she stops living for the external and starts becoming her whole self. So next time someone says, "Don't you feel alone?" she smiles, not because she doesn't understand the question, but because she knows they're asking it from a place she no longer lives. She's not avoiding life. She's stepping fully into it, without distraction, without noise, and without apology. She was raised on stories that promised her everything if she just waited long enough. The glass slipper, the prince, the happily ever after, wrapped in white lace and whispered vows. From childhood, she was taught that love was the reward, the rescue, the reason, that her worth would be measured by someone else's desire to keep her. But something in her cracked, slowly, quietly, until the whole story fell apart. Now she's rewriting it, not because she doesn't believe in love, but because she no longer believes in being saved by it. She's seen what happily ever after looks like behind closed doors, where silence replaces affection, where compromise turns into surrender, where the fairy tale becomes a slow forgetting of self. And so, she chose something far more radical: freedom. She stepped off the page. She no longer needs a love story to feel alive. Her plotline doesn't wait for a romantic twist. She is the story. Her days are not filler between partners. They are chapters of their own, messy, beautiful, and entirely hers. Carl Jung said that what we do not make conscious will rule us from the shadows. And that's exactly what she's doing, making it conscious. The script she was handed, she questions every word. The roles she was expected to play, she puts them down like costumes that never truly fit. The expectations she absorbed without consent, she returns them to sender without guilt. This is shadow work, not just facing what's dark, but unearthing what's buried beneath conditioning. She stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing herself. Not because it's easy, but because it's honest. When a woman rejects the narrative, she becomes the author. And that unsettles people. A woman who doesn't need a wedding to feel complete, who doesn't view solitude as a failure, who refuses to play the role of better half. She's not broken. She's awake. And that awakening is not the end of her story. It's the first real page. It took her years to realize that what she was searching for in others could only be found within herself. The validation, the tenderness, the stability, the safety. She used to think love would come and fix everything, that if she could just be enough, give enough, wait long enough, someone would arrive and finally hold the pieces together. But somewhere between the waiting and the breaking, she learned the truth. No one is coming to save her. And that's not tragic. It's transformational. Because now, she no longer needs saving. She knows how to hold herself. Her emotions don't shake her like they used to. Her loneliness doesn't scream anymore. It whispers. Her triggers no longer own her. They teach her. This is what emotional self-sufficiency looks like. Not detachment, but depth. Not isolation, but integration. She's not numb. She's grounded. She doesn't chase love to feel full. She is full. She doesn't text just to feel needed. She doesn't keep people around to quiet her insecurities. She doesn't confuse attention with affection. That kind of confusion? She's outgrown it. She's done the work. She's sat with the ache. She's forgiven herself for the time she begged, bent, broke. This woman is not waiting. She's not sitting by the window of her life hoping someone will knock. She's already outside, walking, building, creating, choosing. She's not incomplete. She's intact. And that wholeness is what makes her glow differently. Not with desperation, but with discernment. Some mistake her self-sufficiency for arrogance. Others see it as a wall. But it's not pride. It's protection. It's what happens when a woman has stitched herself back together enough times to know, I will never unravel for anyone again. Love may still come. It may arrive quietly with open hands and honest eyes. And when it does, she'll welcome it, not from need, but from clarity, not as a crutch, but as a compliment. Until then, she isn't longing. She's living, fully, unapologetically, and on her own terms. She used to believe that love was something you found outside of yourself, that it lived in someone else's gaze, someone else's hands, someone else's willingness to stay. But the deeper she went into herself, the more she realized real love begins within. And without that foundation, everything else is just noise, brief, shallow, and always demanding more than it gives. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." And that's exactly what she did. She turned inward, not out of defeat, but out of necessity, not because the world abandoned her, but because she chose to stop abandoning herself. And in that sacred solitude, she didn't just meet herself, She remembered who she was before the world told her who to be. She built a relationship with the one person who had been with her through everything, herself. She listened to her own voice without silencing it. She sat with her fears without rushing to bury them. She explored her shadow without shame. And in doing so, she stopped waiting for someone else to reflect her worth back to her. She saw it in the mirror, clearly, finally. This is what singleness becomes when it's chosen with awareness, a sanctuary for self-awakening. Not a void, but a vessel. Not a lack, but a laboratory for becoming. And the more she deepened that relationship with herself, the more she saw how fragile and performative many relationships had been. Because when you don't know yourself, you don't know what you're agreeing to. You don't know what's real, what's projection, what's compensation. You call trauma chemistry and validation love. She knows better now, so she stays single, not to avoid connection, but to protect the one she spent so long building with herself, the most loyal, unshakable, illuminating bond she's ever known. The relationship that doesn't expire, doesn't ghost, doesn't demand that she dim, and when someone eventually arrives, they'll be meeting a woman who already knows herself, deeply, fully, which means she won't settle, not because she's hard to love, but because she finally knows what love should feel like. Once upon a time, she needed to be seen, needed the compliment, the text, the glance across the room that said, "You're enough." But that was before she realized how fragile approval is, how quickly it fades, how cheaply it's offered, how rarely it's rooted in anything real. So she stepped away. From the performance, from the pretending, from the aching need to be picked. Now, she doesn't measure her worth by who desires her. She doesn't tie her value to male attention, social affirmation, or romantic milestones. That version of her? The one who shaped herself to be digestible, who twisted into roles to be more likable, more palatable, more wanted. She's gone. Not bitter. Just done. Because here's the truth. When a woman no longer needs to be chosen, she becomes dangerous. She doesn't flirt to feel worthy. She doesn't chase to feel whole. She doesn't dress, speak, or shrink for a gaze that was never hers to begin with. She lives, boldly, unapologetically, on her own frequency, and when the world asks her, "Why are you still single?" she doesn't flinch, she smiles, because she knows something they don't. I don't need to be picked, I choose myself. That's not arrogance, it's alignment. It's the moment a woman stops outsourcing her validation and remembers her power. It's the shift from waiting to creating, from proving to being. And yes, it rattles people. A woman who doesn't need to be chosen can't be controlled. And a woman who can't be controlled, she's free. Approval is cheap. Presence is priceless. And she now knows the difference. So she walks away from anything that demands her to perform for attention. She stops explaining her choices, her silence, her standards. She's not interested in applause. She's interested in peace. And peace isn't loud. It's just consistent. She doesn't chase the spotlight. She is the light. And she doesn't need anyone to say yes to make that true. There was a time she held on to potential like it was a promise. She'd see the glimpses of what could be, the hints of growth, the almost love. And she'd stay. Invest. Wait. She called it loyalty. She called it hope. But now she calls it what it truly was, self-abandonment disguised as patience. She no longer entertains maybes. She no longer builds a future off of fragments. Because she's learned the hard way. Potential is not partnership. Intent is not investment. And chemistry isn't character. This woman doesn't fall for empty words wrapped in charm. She listens for action, alignment, energy. And if it's not there, she leaves. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. She no longer romanticizes red flags or makes excuses for emotional unavailability. She doesn't stay just because someone says, "I'm trying." She's not interested in being someone's project or proving she's worthy of commitment. That desperation is gone. That need to be chosen has dissolved. Now she chooses. And yes, some say her standards are too high, that she's asking for too much. But let's be honest, what they really mean is, you can't be controlled. Because her standards aren't about pickiness, they're about consciousness. She's not looking for a savior, a status symbol, or a storyline. She's looking for depth, consistency, presence, someone who knows themselves deeply enough to meet her there, not in fantasy, but in reality. She no longer fears being alone. She fears losing herself again in someone who only offers half of what she's already given herself. That's not pride, it's wisdom. Desperation made her tolerate breadcrumbs. Discernment taught her to walk away from the whole table if it wasn't feeding her soul. So now she listens not just to what is said, but to how it feels, to the silences, the energy, the effort. And if it doesn't match the peace she's created, she simply exits, quietly, powerfully, because she's no longer trying to make something work. She's waiting for something that already does. She walks into a room without needing to be noticed, and somehow that makes her impossible to ignore. There's something about a woman who doesn't orbit around validation, who doesn't cling to titles or timelines, who doesn't need a partner to legitimize her existence. And for many, that kind of presence is unsettling. They ask, what's wrong with her? As if solitude is a sickness, as if being single past a certain age is a secret shame. But what they're really asking is, how is she okay without what I was told I need? That discomfort? It's not about her. It's the collective unconscious, stirred by a woman who refuses to follow the path society carved for her. Carl Jung taught that what we reject in ourselves, we project onto others. And she has become a screen for projection, painted with labels she never asked for: cold, intimidating, damaged, unapproachable. But she knows the truth. Her life, lived on her terms, is a mirror. It reflects the freedoms others abandoned, the desires they buried, the courage they couldn't access. And instead of looking inward, they make her the problem. She is not the problem. She's the proof that freedom exists. A woman who chooses herself breaks the contract written in silence, that she must need to be needed, soften to be accepted, shrink to be loved. She broke that contract, burned it, and wrote a new one in her own language. And so the world reacts, with confusion, with whispers, with judgment, because they don't understand how someone can live fully without leaning on someone else. But what they don't realize is she's already done what most are too afraid to even try. She has faced her shadow. She has claimed her solitude. She has stopped pretending. So let them wonder. Let them speculate. She doesn't owe anyone an explanation for her peace, and if her independence feels like a threat, maybe it's because it exposes how many people are still living half-truths, still wearing masks, still chasing what she's already outgrown. Let's be clear, she hasn't closed her heart. She's opened her eyes. She doesn't reject love. She rejects illusion, the kind dressed up in charm, but hollow in substance. She's not against relationships. She's against the ones that ask her to lose herself to keep someone else comfortable, the ones that call control passion, codependency, romance, and silence peace. She knows the difference now, and she refuses to pretend otherwise. She's not cold. She just refuses to beg for crumbs and call it dinner. She's tasted too much truth to settle for sweetness that rots. She's not jaded. She's discerning. And the difference is everything. Love, when it comes, must come clean, not with roles, not with expectations, not with stories that demand she be smaller than she is. If it shows up, it must meet her where she is, in her fullness, in her freedom, in her fierce clarity. She's done playing translator for people who can't speak her emotional language. She doesn't chase chemistry anymore. She waits for compatibility. Because love to her is not an escape. It's not a mask. It's truth, raw, uncomplicated, real. It's not about completing her. It's about joining her, not to fix, not to fill, but to witness, to respect, to stand beside. So no, she's not anti-love. She's just no longer interested in the version that costs her authenticity. She'd rather be alone in truth than together in a lie. That's not resistance. That's self-respect. That's what happens when a woman stops hoping to be saved and starts demanding to be seen. There was a time she measured her worth by how wanted she was, how much space she could occupy in someone else's world. But now, freedom is her currency. She values her time like it's sacred, her energy like it's gold, and her space like it's holy ground. And she moves through the world without needing to justify any of it. She doesn't explain why she left the message on read. She doesn't apologize for prioritizing solitude. She doesn't bend to accommodate timelines that aren't hers. This isn't arrogance. This is sovereignty. She knows what it took to get here, to unlearn her own self-abandonment, to stop asking for permission to breathe deeply. Now she protects her freedom the way others protect their reputations, because to her, freedom isn't just time alone. It's the ability to make a decision without guilt, to say no without flinching, to walk away without a breakdown. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole within oneself. That's the path she's on, not because she doesn't want to be part of something, but because she refuses to be a half of anything. She's not afraid to commit. She's just unwilling to sacrifice her essence in the name of belonging. That kind of freedom confuses people. They say she's distant, difficult, hard to reach. But they're mistaking boundaries for barriers. What they don't see is that her freedom isn't keeping love out. It's filtering out anything that can't honor her wholeness. And if love comes, it must come without a cage. It must come with room for her wings. Because she didn't fight to become this version of herself just to give it all away. She's not here to be kept. She's here to be met. She didn't wake up one day choosing solitude. She arrived here through fire, through silence, through the ache of watching herself disappear inside people who never saw her clearly. There were times she made herself small to fit into someone else's story. She muted her opinions to keep the peace. She folded her dreams neatly into the corners of a life built for someone else's comfort. They called it love. But love should never ask you to vanish. She's been there, the version of herself who said yes when every fiber of her being screamed no. The one who mistook sacrifice for strength, who wore loyalty like chains, who tried to be easy to love by erasing every edge that made her real. And the cost? It was everything. So no, singleness isn't just a preference. It's a homecoming, a sacred return to the woman she was before she was trained to doubt her own voice. She doesn't crave drama or chaos or someone to complete her. She craves peace. And she knows now that peace has a price. It's not in what she has to give up to be loved. It's in what she refuses to surrender again. Her solitude isn't loneliness. It's protection. It's the space she finally made for herself after years of being crowded out by other people's needs. She's not afraid of being alone. She's afraid of disappearing again. And so she no longer bargains with her peace. She no longer makes deals that cost her too much. No relationship, no companionship, no fleeting intimacy is worth more than the self she fought to reclaim. She's not bitter, she's just awake. And from that clarity, she builds a life that holds her, not in halves or conditions, but in wholeness. There was a time she couldn't say no without explaining herself, without softening it, without shrinking as she said it. But that time has passed. Now her no is sacred. It's clean, clear, unapologetic. It doesn't come with a backstory. It doesn't come with guilt. It comes with wisdom, because this woman knows that every yes that betrays her intuition is a slow act of self-betrayal. She's said yes before when her body tensed, when her spirit protested. She knows what it feels like to agree and then disappear inside the aftermath. So now she says no to anything that asks her to prove her worth, to anything that drains without giving, to anything that feels like a performance, a mask, a compromise of her inner truth. That no is not anger. It's clarity. It's a boundary that protects her time, her body, her mind. It keeps her grounded when the world wants her to float into roles she never asked to play. It keeps her soft where she chooses, not where she's coerced. Some people call it cold, others call it selfish, but what it really is spiritual. Because every time she honors her boundary, she honors her healing. Every time she refuses to abandon herself, she deepens her connection to something bigger than approval, alignment. Her no isn't just about keeping people out, it's about keeping her essence intact. She doesn't scream it, she doesn't need to. She simply chooses, quietly, cleanly, without a need to explain. Because when a woman learns to say no without guilt, the world hears a sound it doesn't know how to silence. And that sound is freedom. She doesn't march, she doesn't shout, she doesn't need to. Her very existence is a quiet revolution. In a world that rewards performance and punishes stillness, she chose stillness. In a culture that ties a woman's worth to who wants her, she decided to want herself. And in a society that fears the aging single woman, she became one and flourished. She broke every silent rule they handed her, that she should settle before she runs out of time. That aloneness is failure. That fulfillment is something given, not claimed. She didn't just reject those lies, she dismantled them from the inside out. And she did it without a speech, without a stage, without permission. Her life may not be loud, but it's radical, because it holds the weight of truth most are too afraid to name. That being chosen is not the same as being seen. That being married is not the same as being fulfilled. That being alone is not the same as being unloved. Her choices confront people, not through argument, but through example. She becomes the pause in someone else's autopilot, the moment they ask themselves, what if I could live like that? Not needing, not proving, just being. That's her quiet rebellion. She refuses to disappear just because she doesn't play the expected role. She lets herself be visible, even when her path confuses, threatens, or challenges others. And that visibility? It's not about ego. It's about permission. Every woman who sees her realizes there's another way, not easier, not safer, but truer. She is the revolution they didn't see coming, because she didn't arrive with fire. She arrived with freedom. She never set out to be a symbol. She just wanted peace. But in her refusal to settle, in her devotion to truth, in the quiet confidence of her solitude, she became a light. Other women notice, even the ones who don't say it, even the ones still entangled in roles they no longer recognize themselves inside of. They feel her energy, her clarity, her refusal to beg for belonging. And without even meaning to, she becomes a kind of compass, a living question. What if you stopped waiting to be enough and just were? She doesn't lecture, she doesn't shame, she doesn't post a million quotes or give unsolicited advice. She lives, fully, authentically. And that living becomes the message. She reminds women, without words, that their worth isn't tied to sacrifice. That softness doesn't mean silence. That being alone doesn't mean being broken. She proves it with how she walks, how she holds herself, how she says no without trembling, how she says yes without need. And sometimes that inspiration isn't loud or obvious. It's a seed, a shift, a quiet moment in someone else's mind. If she can choose herself, maybe I can too. She is not a savior. She doesn't try to be. But her presence gives others permission to return to themselves, to remember that love is not something they earn by shrinking. So no, she doesn't preach. She embodies. And in doing so, she becomes the most powerful kind of mentor. Not the kind who speaks first, but the kind who reminds others of their own voice. If love comes, and it might, it won't come as a rescue mission. It won't arrive to fix her, heal her, complete her, or give her life meaning. Because she's already done the healing. She's already found the meaning. She's already complete. If love comes, it will come with open hands, not expectations. It will arrive as a witness, not a savior. As an equal, not a hero. There will be no pedestal, no chasing, no power plays, just presence, just truth, Just two whole people, standing side by side, not because they need each other to be whole, but because they choose to grow together without erasing themselves. And until then, she's not waiting. She's not frozen in time or paused on the edge of a dream. She's not counting days or scrolling through possibilities. She's becoming. Every day, she's unfolding, softening and sharpening all at once. She's filling her own life with color, with meaning, with movement. She's learning, building, resting, rising. She is not in limbo, she is in her life. So when love arrives, it will find her living, not longing. It will find her rooted, not reaching. It will have to rise to meet her, because she will not descend again to chase what doesn't honor her. This is not pride. It's protection. It's peace. And if that kind of love never comes, she will still be whole. She will still be radiant. She will still be free. Because the greatest love story she's ever written is the one with herself, not out of vanity, not out of defiance, but out of truth. To stay single by choice is not rejection. It is a declaration, I am enough. And that declaration echoes louder than any ring, any vow, any story ever written by someone else. Because now, finally, she is the author. And in this chapter, she doesn't settle for love. She embodies it. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.